It is a remarkable shift underway. The news were that indeed overnight the final problems in the ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel were solved, at least to a certain extent, with all kinds of problems still very much to be solved. But it seems that Smotrich agreed that to basically stay in the government. He's against the agreement, but he stayed in the government. Ben Gavir is against it and he left. But this is not enough to bring down the coalition of the Netanyahu government. So I think it's definitely a very important step in the right direction. Now, even the German SWP representative, that's a German think tank in Berlin, a woman today on the radio said that this is a deal which was ready already last May, but it took obviously Trump's team to intervene, to put pressure on Netanyahu to get it through. And that is an unbelievable thing because, that totally confirms what we have been saying all the time, that all of the horrors which have happened would not have been possible without the agreement of the Biden administration. And, that I think will have an aftermath. But that aside, for the time being, the final vote will take place tomorrow. So far the IDF has been killing dozens and dozens of Palestinians while the ceasefire was supposedly agreed upon. And naturally, with President Trump coming into the White House on Monday, there is indeed a chance that this could resolve the situation. And I think the fact that he, did make good on his word that he wants this deal before he comes into the White House and that it is happening shows a certain resolve. And, maybe the video which Trump had put on his X account with Jeffrey Sachs accusing Netanyahu of the crimes he was talking about may have been an additional pressure. However, given the fact that the situation is absolutely horrendous, and according to Aida Tuma Shiman, who is a Knesset member of Palestinian roots, she had basically said before that all parties in the coalition are for the total cleansing of Gaza and are for the continuation of the operation in the West Bank. So, it's still an absolutely gigantic job, which I think does require the international peace forces, the peace coalition, but also everybody else to make sure that, a real settlement of the crisis can be accomplished, which, according to my view and many, many other people, does require the immediate recognition of a Palestinian state. And, obviously, that state cannot function if there is not an immediate, not just reconstruction of Gaza, which is completely flattened to the ground, but it does require a real peace order in the entire region, which we have provided with the Oasis plan. If we could somehow encourage the Trump administration to really go in into a real peace building by getting the countries of the Middle East together to implement the Oasis plan, then this has a real potential to solve the situation.
Thank everyone who's put this together and puts it together every week virtually across the globe, because I think it's a very important effort. And thank Helga for her opening remarks, which set the stage for my own in a very real sense. Chief Command Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Dennis Fritz, a good friend of mine, and I went over to the Senate Hart Office building on the 8th of January. And the reason we went over there was to join a group called Doctors Against Genocide, who were composed, as we understood it, have no reason to doubt this composition of more than 15,000 medical personnel, many of them doctors who had themselves, pediatricians, surgeons, general physicians, worked in Gaza and knew of what they spoke when they began their protests against the genocide. We are assembled, they, for the first time, as I understood it, and I had no reason to doubt them, for the first time in their lives, in a building representing what the Constitution designed for the U.S. in terms of government. Notice I didn't say empire. I said the United States, the Republic. We're in the lobby of the offices of many of the most important people in the United States Senate. And we're there for a very express purpose. It's 9:30 in the morning. We're assembled. They're in their medical white tunics, got badges on that say Doctors Against Genocide, and a few signs, which of course Dennis and I knew was a violation of the new congressional rules. Don't know why they implemented these rules, but they did. You can't have any signs or placards in the congressional buildings. So we're kind of watching it develop, and all of a sudden, before even we can say anything or do anything or even make introductions, here come 20 to 30 Capitol Police with flex cuffs already out to put on people's arms behind their backs, with scowls on their faces, and telling these doctors, mind you now, these people have never been in these spaces before, maybe as individuals, but certainly not as the group called Doctors Against Genocide. And they're there with plans to go to various congressional offices and to talk to their members about the situation in Gaza. Understandably so, in my view. And so we're perplexed. We can't. The Command Chief Master Sergeant and I'll call him Chief Fritz and I, we're perplexed. What's going on here? And then the words came out of the Capitol Police's boss there. You have 30 seconds to disperse. You have a minute to do this, a minute to do that, get all your placards gone, take your tunics off, take your badges off, and so forth, or we're going to arrest you. And they said it with intent of forethought, if you will. So we're watching these people in frantic disarray now. They've planned this for probably weeks, if not months. They got all their paperwork, they got their schedules, the offices they're going to, and everything else. And all of a sudden they're in a panic. And I didn't blame them, nor did Dennis blame them for being in a panic. Well, about the time we're getting ready to go over to say something to these police, the doctors dispersed themselves without their papers in some cases, and clearly discombobulated, but they were going to the offices. They felt they'd get out of the fire of the Capitol Police if they just did what they said and went on to the first offices that they were going to visit. One of them happened to be Tammy Baldwin, Senator Tammy Baldwin's office. So we eventually gravitated over there with them. Made our complaints, of course, throughout the process. And later, Dennis and I would send an email to the general counsel of the Capitol Police. But basically, this was the way these people, all American citizens, all medical professionals, as I said, doctors, surgeons, pediatricians, and others who'd worked in Gaza, who really had a single point of mission, if you will, at that point, to try and get Dr. Abu Safia, who had been, for no apparent reason other than probably an assertion that he'd been helping Hamas within the hospital complex that he managed, that's my guess anyway, made a prisoner in the awful draconian system that Israel has for Palestinians. And I would assert that that system is probably a microcosm of, certainly not quite as vast as Syria's, which was terrible. Holding people underground and dark for 15 years, not feeding them, raping them periodically, subjecting them to all sorts of torture and so forth in the process of interrogating them. And here goes Dr. Abu Safia, who to that point, heading a hospital, I think in Rafah, if I recall, had been a real hero of the doctors, including these doctors, many of them who, as I said, had worked in Rafah too, and somewhere in Gaza, if not in Rafah. So we're totally puzzled till we get to this one office where we actually had a call with a congressman who you could say was more or less, and this is a minuscule proportion, sympathetic with our point. And what we learned from that congressman about our Congress and the movements afoot under Speaker Johnson, for example's tutelage, direction, and some other things that were coming out in the form of legislation that would, in our view, and I think any good lawyer's view, would prohibit freedom of speech and be constitutional violations, but we had no doubt would probably be backed up by the Supreme Court should it get to that level. Don't know that for sure, but its past experience with it would show that that's a possibility. And these are truly draconian things that they were going to do. They boiled down to limiting the freedom of speech of American citizens if it had anything to do with Palestine, anything to do with Israel that was adverse. And of course, this congressman was himself frightened. He was frightened not only of these kinds of moves by the Congress, his Congress, but also by the fact that his job might be very tenuous indeed, because if he was going to stand up to this sort of stuff, he was going to make a target of himself. So I've gone from the height of geopolitical, geostrategic assessment, where we're not doing too well, thank you very much, down to the granular where we're definitely not doing too well.
So we have this new reality being created, but we don't know what's going to happen going forward. As Colonel Wilkerson has rightfully pointed out, there are political players that are looking for this as just being a pause before they continue what they've done. But I believe that in Israel, we're going to be seeing some fundamental changes inside Israel politically. I think that this hostage situation has created a new political dynamic that is going to transform Israeli politics by disenfranchising Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, and the others. They will be forever disgraced by the lies they have told the Israeli people about the hostages in an effort to deflect responsibility for the failure to get the hostages home on Hamas. And the reality is, it is Netanyahu's fault, singularly, only Ben-Gvir's fault, and they will pay, I believe, a fatal political cost. And with the collapse of Netanyahu, we have a whole new dynamic that creates a level of unpredictability. So if you're an analyst dealing with the Middle East region, I guess you can be happy for one thing. You'll have job security for some time going forward, because this is a very fluid situation that's going to require people to roll up their sleeves and delve into this, because it's changing.
Well, I can only share your concern about, that the situation is, it's a hopeful break, but, I think if we would rest on our laurels, I think the potential for this could go totally wrong is absolutely there. So I would just say, it is now, in my view, the moment where we should all push the Oasis plan, because Trump has said of himself many times that he is a builder, and he does understand something about construction, and he wants to get the economy going for the United States. Maybe if we all would work together to convince him to promote the Oasis plan, and also talk to all the neighbor countries of Israel and Palestine, and lay out, what we try to do with our conferences on the Oasis plan and the videos we made. Maybe it would, inspire the, different leaders of the region. For example, Saudi Arabia is building a ski resort in the desert. I think the temperatures go up to 40, 50 degrees, but they build a ski resort for people to do skiing there. Well, that costs an enormous amount of money. And I would think that, if one would think about building the Oasis plan, providing fresh new water for all the countries in the region, so that one source of conflict would disappear, namely the lack of water, it could inspire the young generation of the Palestinians, the different Arab countries, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, the whole region. And I think, we should really put this perspective of the development massively on the table, because frankly, I think other than a new global strategic new security and development architecture, which involves every country on the planet, which I think is where we have to go. But I think for the region of the Middle East, the Oasis plan is right now the one thing which would change the dynamic. So I would suggest that, maybe, we discuss that in the course of this session of the IPC. And if people agree with that, maybe we can make a mobilization out of that as well.
Look, I'm open to any to work with anybody who's responsibly and with genuine intent looking for a peaceful outcome. The Oasis plan should be developed, furthered, and given a shot. Consider me to be a tool in your tool chest, and I'll help you out any way I can.
I would say the same thing. I think the Saudi ski resort is sort of like salmon fishing in Yemen, if you remember that movie and that book. It's money to satisfy some prelates and some high-ranking royals, but it doesn't do anything for the region and even ultimately for Saudi Arabia. And you're right to put your finger on water. Water is critical in that region, and one of the reasons that actually you can understand partly what Israel has done with regard to Lebanon and elsewhere is their search for water. It's going to become even more critical as climate change wreaks more of its havoc. So, yes, I would be absolutely for that.